Hello and welcome. I'm doing a series of short videos on the history of British English literature starting from the Old English period up to the present. I hope that these videos will help with the last minute preparation for the university exam, PSC test and UGC National Eligibility Test for lectureship. This is the first in the series. We begin with Anglo Saxon literature. Literary History of Britain, Part 1. Anglo Saxon period. Anglo Saxon literature or Old English literature is the earliest form of English literature. It starts from the 7th century to the 11th century AD. Beowulf, written in two parts in 750 AD, is perhaps the most important work and the first major poem in a European vernacular language. Its authorship is unknown and its history still remains a matter of controversy. The story was in all probability brought from the homelands in Denmark and Sweden in the form of a ballad and later fashioned into an epic by some Northumbrian poet. Though the work is manifestly heathen in origin, it might very well have been the work of a Christian writer. The poem centers around the mighty feats of the hero Beowulf, how he fought and killed the monster Grendel, who for 12 years had devastated the lands of King Hrothgar of Danes. Later, Beowulf slew Grendel's mother also. In the second part, Beowulf becomes the king. He fights the dragon of the Gold Horde and kills him single-handedly. However, he receives a mortal wound during the encounter and succumbs to it soon after. The poem ends with Beowulf's funeral rites that show the high loyalty of the Thanes to their lord and also the generosity of the king to his followers. The notable poets who rose to prominence after the conversion of Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. Cadman, an illiterate lay brother in the monastery of Whitby in Yorkshire, is believed to have received the power of verse as a divine gift and became the first to compose Christian poetry in his own language. He now stands at the top of the English literary tradition as the initial Anglo-Saxon or Old English poet of record. Cadman's only surviving work is his hymn, the 9-line alliterative vernacular poem praising God. Cynewulf, a wandering gleeman and a lover of pleasure, had a vision of the cross and began composing religious songs. He is the author of 4 Old English poems preserved in late 10th century manuscripts. Aline and The Fates of the Apostles are in the Vercelli book. The Ascension, which forms the second part of a trilogy, Christ, and is also called Christ the Second, and Julian are in the Exeter book. Anglo-Saxon poetry is characterized by a love for adventure, martial spirit that bursts out into regular war poetry, as in the Battle of Brunanburh, which was written in 937 AD. Fondness for the sea is also another feature of Anglo-Saxon poetry. Form. Anglo-Saxon poetry employs beginning rhyme instead of end rhyme. It has irregular lines with regard to unaccented syllables. Each line is divided into 2 parts. The first part has 2 accented syllables and the second has at least 1. Poetry developed in the north and prose, which was not of much literary value developed in the south. Monasteries of Jarrow and Whitby in Northumbria were the famous centers of Old English literature. Venerable Bede, an English Benedictine monk at the monastery of St. Peter and its companion monastery of St. Paul in Jarrow in the kingdom of Northumbria of the Angles. Ecclesiastical History of the English People is his most famous work that gained him the title the Father of English History. King Alfred the Great was a patron of literature. Though the works Ecclesiastical History of the English People by the English historian Bede and the 7 books of histories against the pagans by Paulus Orosius, a 5th century theologian, were not translated by Alfred himself, these works have been credited to him. King Alfred also translated into English Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, Pastoral Care of Saint Gregory I, the great 6th century Pope that provided a manual for priests in the instruction of their flocks, and Soliloquies written by the 5th century theologian Saint Augustine of Hippo. King Alfred was also the guiding spirit behind the compilation of the Anglo Saxon Chronicle, the first history of the Germanic people up to 1154 AD. Benedictine Monks. Ælfric wrote homilies in English in 2 series for the instruction of ordinary peasants. The first series of 40 homilies devotes itself to the major events of the Christian year, and the second series deals with church doctrine and history. Wulfstan, the Archbishop of York, was one of the most distinguished Old English prose writers. In 1014, as Archbishop, he wrote his famous work, a homily which he titled the Sermo Lupi ad Anglos, or the Sermon of the Wolf to the English, which is about King Ethelred, mildly accusing him of cowardice and unpreparedness in defending England against the Danes. Norman Conquest. Norman Conquest in 1066 impacted English language and literature in many ways and became a landmark event. It brought new language and new customs by importing into England French literary ideals and culture. Latin and French were the only languages recognized in the court. Anglo Saxon poetry slowly disappeared, but prose survived as it was modeled on Latin. Thank you.